After the engine halves have been cemented together using cyanoacrylic adhesive, commonly called CA, and cured for a couple of hours, we are now ready to hand paint the engine. You may use any adhesive of your choice if you do not want to use CA. The first color I am applying is TCP 638 Ford Engine Blue. All of our engine colors are formulated to be hand painted and will dry to a high gloss. I am using a solvent resistant paintbrush to paint the outside portion of the engine, but not the transmission. While I use generic size brushes, you may use any brush set that you choose. If wanted, you may use an airbrush to apply the Ford Engine Blue paint if you dilute the TCP 638 with 20 to 25% of thinner, which is our TCP 015. The engine will have other parts attached later in this build, so make sure that you turn the assembly around to ensure that you've completely covered the engine. It does not matter which direction you use to apply the paint. The purpose is to just cover the part entirely, except for the transmission. In airbrushing, while it is important to cover the part in question, it is more important to lay down an even coat. That is why you go in a back and forth steady motion when airbrushing our paint. Put aside the entire engine assembly to dry before proceeding with painting the transmission an aluminum color. We are now ready to paint more parts for the engine assembly. Shake the bottle of TCP 638 to mix the paint thoroughly. If available, you may use a paint shaker for this purpose. Use any solvent-resistant paintbrush of your choice to paint the small parts and the valve covers. Cover what will be exposed after the build. Note, some of the other parts for the engine were airbrushed, namely the exhaust, matte steel, the fan and the pulley, matte black, and aluminum on some other parts. After all of the painted parts have dried, we are now ready to assemble the engine according to the Revell instructions for the street version of the motor. Notice that we have already painted the transmission TCP013 aluminum. By leaving open a bottle of our paint for several hours to allow some of the solvents to evaporate. This will give you a slurry within the bottle of aluminum paint, thickening the paint enough to allow you to hand brush the aluminum onto the transmission. Follow the Revell instructions carefully so that each part faces the correct direction. I put the CA into an aluminum dish to make it easier to apply the glue onto the parts using a toothpick. You may use any technique that you are comfortable with to achieve similar results. As you add more parts to the engine, you may have to hold the parts in place for a few seconds to over a minute to ensure that you get adequate adhesion. Apply the adhesive in a pattern, again, that you are comfortable with to ensure the parts will adhere in the correct position. Note that I can apply CA directly onto any painted part and that the paint will not be disturbed, nor do we have any issues with not getting a good bond between parts. I will be adding the engine to the chassis you see here in part 4. After applying the last of the parts to the street version of the engine assembly, at this point I wrapped a rubber band around the assembly to hold everything in place. Then I set it aside to allow the CA to fully cure.